Hi, welcome sa episode 10 of the Basta Bitcoin podcast. For this particular episode, I'll talk about a happy future, which is the Philippines as a pro-Bitcoin country. Ano ba yung ibig sabihin kapag yung Pilipinas has become a pro-Bitcoin country? Let's start with yung big context. Ano ba yung Bitcoin? Yung Bitcoin is essentially an upgrade to the existing monetary system. So, kung hindi nyo pa naiintindihan kung ano yung Bitcoin, you might want to go back to the previous episodes. But essentially, yung ating current na monetary system ay centralized. So, kailangan mong mag-rely sa mga trusted intermediaries katulad ng politicians, ng bureaucrats, and ng mga central banks. It's also inflationary. If you're going to look at the history of the fiat monetary system, talagang nag-struggle siya with controlling inflation dahil inflation is the way by which the entire system is able to operate. Kapag tinanggal mo yung inflation, then the entire monetary system will break down. So, yung Bitcoin is a trust minimized or a trustless and a decentralized monetary system. Wala rin siyang inflation. Kaya naman kung titignan mo based on those metrics alone, you will come to the conclusion na yung Bitcoin monetary system is a superior monetary system. Kaya naman ako bilang isang Pilipino, I'm hoping for the day na yung Philippines, yung the Republic of the Philippines and its government decides to become a pro-Bitcoin country. Let me just try to remove yung doubt or yung concern ng ibang mga tao. And I notice this every time na nagle-lecture ako about Bitcoin, especially sa mga abogado. Yung tanong na, is Bitcoin anti-government? And yung sagot doon is that Bitcoin is not anti-government. It's also not pro-government. Bitcoin is just software. And sinasabi ko to not to minimize yung importance ng Bitcoin. Of course, Bitcoin is very important. Kaya naman yung mga Bitcoiners are so excited about Bitcoin. But Bitcoin as software doesn't have any emotions. Wala siyang intensyon. Yung isang tao, institusyon, or gobyerno na gumagamit ng Bitcoin will have no impact on the way Bitcoin operates. Kaya naman, lagi naming sinasabi na Bitcoin doesn't care. So, Bitcoin is simply a monetary system. It is a software. Habang may mga miners and may mga validators, may mga users who pay the fees, then Bitcoin will be able to operate. And it doesn't have any emotions dahil it's entirely rules-based. So again, if you're not familiar with the terms that I use, you can go back to the previous episodes to understand better yung mga terms na ginagamit ko. Kaya whether you adopt Bitcoin or not, whether the Philippines, the United States, Japan, South Korea, or Russia, or China adopts Bitcoin, it will still operate on the same basic rules. Essentially, 21 million Bitcoins, walang inflation, it's digitally sound, it's global by default, and it is censorship resistant or permissionless. And so, yung level ng adoption ng mga tao, ng nation states, will not affect those rules. Kaya, Bitcoin is not anti-government. Okay, before we get to the part na the Philippines is a pro-Bitcoin country, maybe you might want to ask, ano ba yung current na environment ng Bitcoin or ng relationship between the Philippine government and the Bitcoin monetary system? Sa aking pananaw, the Philippine government has adopted what I would call a positive or accommodative regulatory stance with respect to Bitcoin. Ano yung ibig sabihin ng accommodative or positive na regulatory stance? Ang ibig sabihin nun, thankfully, the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, ang ating central bank or the BSP, has allowed exchanges and other entities to operate here dito sa Pilipinas to sell Bitcoin. And ang ibig sabihin nun, individuals, every Filipino or everyone who's here in the Philippines, pwede silang bumili ng Bitcoin. Yung iba nga, nagte-trade pa. Pwede silang mag-save in Bitcoin. And kung meron silang technical expertise, they can store the keys themselves. Ang ibig sabihin nun na they can self-custody their Bitcoin. So, pwede lang kunin from the exchanges yung kanilang binili na Bitcoin and become banks themselves, which is the technology of Bitcoin. It allows human beings, every citizen of the world, every Filipino, to become their own bank by saving their own form of money, which is Bitcoin. Kaya naman, yung conclusion ko is, dito sa Pilipinas, we have a government na yung stance nila with respect to Bitcoin is positive or accommodative. At the same time, yung positive or accommodative stance ng Philippine government with respect to Bitcoin is entirely different dun sa pro-Bitcoin na policy. And ano ba yung pro-Bitcoin policy? No, I'll give you 5 instances or 5 ways by which the Philippines can be considered a pro-Bitcoin country. No, hindi to kailangang makamit lahat ng Pilipinas, but it would be a good idea if the Philippines, becomes a pro-Bitcoin country by completing itong pwede nating matawag na checklist for Bitcoin adoption. Number 1, no, yung unang-unang positive sign that the Philippines is a pro-Bitcoin country is when the Philippine government itself decides to hold Bitcoin. So, pwede niyang gayahin yung the most famous exemplar, which is El Salvador. No? Yung El Salvador, several years ago, decided to buy Bitcoin and hold it in their treasury. So, yung Pilipinas, pwede niyang gawin yan in a less emphatic way through something like the Maharlika Investment Fund. So, yung mga Pilipino, alam naman natin na the Marcos government has passed the Maharlika investment law, and isa siyang investment vehicle, no? So, isa dun sa pwedeng gawin ng Maharlika Investment Fund is to invest in Bitcoin. And to follow yung El Salvador example, pwede niyang i-announce sa buong mundo yung pagbili niya ng Bitcoin and pakita yung Bitcoin address para magkaroon ng credibility yung fund. Sa aking pananaw, many hedge funds, many sovereign wealth funds will start doing this dahil once they realize yung power ng Bitcoin not only as a store of value but as a credible part of your portfolio, then it's better na i-announce ng mga sovereign wealth funds. So, dahil yung Pilipinas, meron na siyang Maharlika Investment Fund, an important step towards becoming a pro-Bitcoin country is when the Maharlika Investment Fund itself, no, starts holding Bitcoin. Pangalawa, no, a good sign na yung Pilipinas ay pro-Bitcoin country is not only when it decides to invest in Bitcoin through a vehicle katulad ng Maharlika Investment Fund, but when the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, yung ating central bank itself, decides to use Bitcoin as part of its reserves. So today, yung ating Bangko Sentral, meron siyang iba't ibang assets na hinahawakan. Yung dollar, for example, yung gold, as another example, or yung ibang mga malalakas na currencies, no? But kung gustong mag-level up ng ating Bangko Sentral, one option that they can do is to buy Bitcoin and put it in their own reserves. Dahil as Bitcoin gets adopted by various countries and by various institutions, no, it becomes a very important part of the portfolio na hinahawakan ng iba't ibang mga public institutions. And of course, yung pinaka-importanting public institution when it comes to the global monetary system is yung central bank. And yung ating Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, I think one of these days or one of these years will start thinking seriously about putting Bitcoin in their reserve. Pangatlo, no, a strong indicator that the Philippines is a pro-Bitcoin country is not only when the Bangko Sentral puts Bitcoin in its reserves, but when the Bangko Sentral itself, no, backs our peso with Bitcoin. Ano yung ibig sabihin ng peso backed by Bitcoin? Well, ang ibig sabihin nun na for every peso, no, na ini-issue ng Philippine government, merong percentage nun na Bitcoin. So, for example, for every 100 million pesos na ini-issue ng Philippine government as fiat money or as peso, we can have something like 30%, no, or 60% held in Bitcoin. So, kung meron kang 100 million pesos, for every 100 million new issuance of peso, merong 30 to 60% or any certain percentage na backed by Bitcoin. This is not strange, no? Hindi siya bago dahil in fact, up until the last century, may mga batas na nagsasabi na hindi pwedeng mag-print ng paper money or ng dollar yung Federal Reserve, no, without a corresponding percentage of gold. So sa pagkakaintindi ko, no, for every dollar na issued by the US government, dapat 60% nun, no, is backed by gold. Kaya naman, yung ganong sistema is best for controlling money printing, which means na it's best for controlling inflation. Kasi kung titingnan mo yung inflation as money printing, as monetary debasement, kung yung peso or yung dollar is backed by Bitcoin, then merong leash yung money printer. Merong limitasyon dun sa abilidad ng mga bureaucrats para mag-print ng excess money. And ultimately, that protects the power of the citizen to save in their fiat money. Ano yung pang-apat na senyales na yung Pilipinas has become a pro-Bitcoin country? Para sa akin, it's when the government starts to recognize Bitcoin as money. So, ngayon kasi, Bitcoin is essentially treated as a commodity. And ang ibig sabihin nun, if you decide to sell your Bitcoin, then you may be held liable for capital gains tax. Pero kung yung Bitcoin is treated as money, then pwede mo siyang gamitin for payments without having to pay any tax. Katulad na lang nung peso. Kapag ginamit mo yung peso mo, you don't have to pay tax. Or kapag pinalitan mo yung peso to dollar, no, you don't have to pay tax on that, no. So kapag yung Pilipinas ni-recognize niya yung Bitcoin as money, then it becomes easier for Filipinos to use Bitcoin as a form of payment. A stronger version of this would be to recognize Bitcoin as a legal tender, no? Hindi siya kailangang gawin ng Pilipinas sa aking pananaw, pero Bitcoin as legal tender means na you can force yung seller of any goods or service to accept Bitcoin as a form of payment. And kung ayaw tanggapin nung isang mangangalakal yung Bitcoin as payment, then you can use the court system to consignate or to satisfy an obligation with Bitcoin as a form of payment. But either way, no, once the Philippine government recognizes Bitcoin as a form of money or as legal tender, Ang ibig sabihin nun, hindi mo na kailangang magbayad ng tax for using Bitcoin as a form of money. Panglima, no? Yung isang importanteng senyales na yung Pilipinas ay isang pro-Bitcoin country is kung yung gobyerno itself starts mining Bitcoin. And this is very important in the case of the Philippines dahil yung ating bansa ay malakas sa enerhiya, no? We're energy rich. So meron tayong hydro, meron tayong gas, no? Meron tayong solar, meron tayong wind. So meron tayong diverse sources of energy, and yung Bitcoin mining is a way to monetize kung ano man yung excess energy natin. And that means na with the use of excess energy or excess capacity ng Pilipinas in terms of energy, we can convert that energy into sound money. Kaya I think it's one important aspect ng energy use or ng energy policy ng Pilipinas na pwedeng tutukan ng ating mga politicians and policymakers. It's how to use the power of Bitcoin to convert yung ating energy into sound money. So I think yung limang signs ng the Philippines becoming a pro-Bitcoin country translates to what? No? Translates to lower inflation, which is good for everyone, especially Filipinos, no, who suffer from high levels of inflation. It translates to greater transparency in governance dahil kung alam ng mga Pilipino kung saan napupunta yung pera nila dahil makikita nila yung Bitcoin na hawak ng Maharlika Investment Fund, then mas magkakaroon ng tiwala yung mga Pilipino sa kanilang gobyerno. Number 3, it strengthens our currency. Kung yung currency, the peso, is backed by Bitcoin, then it becomes more trustworthy. Ultimately, of course, yung Philippines becoming a pro-Bitcoin country means that it's able to tackle positively yung problem of inflation, which is good for the country and good for Filipinos, whether you're upper class, you're middle class, or economically challenged. By the way, in case you find the contents of this podcast interesting, or if you're interested in doing a deeper dive into the history of money or the Bitcoin monetary network, you might want to check out the books I have written. They're available locally and internationally. Locally through my website and internationally on Amazon.com. Thank you.